This is an interview with Mary Margaret Oliver by Cliff Kuhn and Gretchen McLaughlin, May 6th, 1993, Georgia Government Documentation Project, Georgia State University.
How?
Okay.
I guess I was interested, you've only been in office since 87, is that right?
I was elected are we on now?
Yeah.
I was elected in 1987 in a special election, the death of Peggy Charles.
Right.
So my first session was midterm, 88.
I was thinking that in both the House and the Senate, you've been associated with a large amount of legislation in that period of time, and I was wondering sort of how that happened, and then I also was wondering this year, what being in the Senate is like, what the process of the Senate is like compared to the House.
Well, let me start at the beginning of my career. I was awarded a wonderful committee opportunity by Speaker Murphy, who appoints, obviously, the committees. Peggy Childs had served on the House Judiciary Committee, and she was the only woman on that committee. And I, during my campaign, in fact, started to campaign with the Speaker's office for an appointment to that committee. It is a committee that handles 40% of the general legislation. It's the only committee that meets every day. It is a very substantive, technically oriented, get it right, legal draftsmanship, and important policy making committee in the House. And so I wanted to be on it very much. And I got that appointment, and I've got some theories about why he did that for me, but I'll share if you want me to. But there's 12, 13, 14 people on the committee in that range in the years I served, and I think I was the only one that never missed a committee meeting any time. I missed one day in the session in 5 years, and that's when I had to fly to Congress to do some testimony in front of Congress. But if you show up every single day at that particular table in the broad political arena, there will be work to do. And if you as a freshman are willing to contribute that on time, ready to be there, ready to, as Mike Mascot says, on time, dressed to play, show up on time, dressed to play, then you're in the play. And so I was given a lot of opportunities to touch and participate in a lot of legislation in my first legislative career, because I had been in the hall as a lobbyist doing technical drafting work.
For whom?
For a variety of different groups. I was a volunteer lobbyist for the Junior League. I was a paid lobbyist for the Georgia Council on Child Abuse, my Magistrate Court Judge Association, the podiatrist, and for several years, the first time I went to the Capitol, for Georgia Legal Services, doing a lot of work for the low-income consumer, elderly, foreclosure fraud legislation in the first half of the 80s. So I had already developed some work habits around doing the work for the legislator. And that's what I think a lobbyist does best. You not only write the bill for them, but you also write the speech, and you also write the press release, and then you give that person full credit. And when you do all the work and give them all the credit, that was a very effective technique to be effective. And so I learned that there is a void of people that are willing to do a lot of boring work, and a particular void of people ready to do a lot of work that is a little bit of a broader public interest kind of arena than just the paid lobbyist for the podiatrist is willing to do a kind of work, but it's a very, very narrow area. And I used that experience, I think, well, I got a good committee assignment, and I was at the table working on lots of fairly low-profile legislative efforts that enabled to produce a quantity of legislation that was not a big deal in any way, but in the first couple of years I passed a lot of bills that were essentially court-related or judge-related. That was my area of of knowledge, having been a judge and a lawyer for a long time. And some other things too. And then the speaker, I think, very generously appointed me in '90, which would have been my third session, to chair a House Senate Study Committee on Child Protection Issues. It was really after my second session. And he did that because he wanted the Judiciary Committee to be the site of that legislative work, and because I had done some other things in that arena. And that was a high-profile opportunity to do a large volume of work. And that package in '90 was about 200 pages, about 8 bills, and it was a really excellent opportunity to be in the room, at the table, in a pivotal position on some fairly comprehensive legislative efforts. The people in the General Assembly who are both capable of doing a large amount of work and too willing to do a large amount of work for 100 different reasons is not that many. I mean, good reasons. They're not there to do all this boring kind of stuff. And so I became useful to the leadership. I became useful to my committee chairs as a technical person who would assume responsibility and who could produce a baseline, adequate, competent level of work product. And I ended up being a subcommittee chair fairly quickly of all the committees I sat on. The Workers' Comp Subcommittee and Industrial Relations, that was a committee that didn't have a lot of lawyers on it. And I had a little bit of a reputation for not being aligned with business or being aligned with employees, and a little bit of a both sides of the fence kind of. So I was chair of that, which then gave me an appointment, which I requested, to be on the Workers' Comp Commission.
Right.
Transportation Committee, I was chair of the rail issues, which didn't have a lot of work to it, but so I just found that was a strategy that helped me get an opportunity to do a lot of things. And I'm industrious. I'm a good work product person. I'm a good work ethic.
Why do you think the Speaker appointed you to the Judiciary Committee the first term?
He likes lawyers. He liked Peggy a lot, and I think he did see a fairness in a woman being on that important committee. Thirdly, I'd been campaigning for it. I'd gotten Robin Harris.
Right.
Robin Harris was a contemporary of Tom Murphy and a competitor with Murphy.
Harris was a federal legislator in the 50s.
60s.
The architect of food bank.
Many things.
Very much involved with Joe Busby's campaign.
Busby and Harris, and was chair of Judiciary. He was chair of
died
Judiciary.
at a sort of tragically young death in his early 60s.
Right. But he was a very important person in Murphy's arena. And when Murphy was ascending, Harris was a competitor, and I think they were very respectful competitors. Harris called him Beauregard. He called him up and, told him.
This is late 60s, early 70s with the rise of the caucus and the rise of the House leadership.
The day before he made this appointment, I ran into Murphy and in the hall down there, and he hadn't acted on the appointment. Again, it was interim, so there wasn't anything pressing. And I had just gotten through trying a case in federal court in Gainesville, a landline dispute with the Chattahoochee Forest on behalf of some mountain guy up there. And I lost the case, but it was an interesting little case, and I had to learn about how the Chattahoochee Forest landlines were established. And it's basically a mule carrying pulling a pole, dragging, so it was not very artfully designed in those mountains. And I told Murphy that I just lost this case, and that the Judge O'Kelly had given the government 3 chances to prove that they owned the Chattahoochee Forest, and that the government never really proved it, I thought. And that the judge kept giving them another chance, reopening the case. And then he went off for 20 minutes about how DAs were always allowed 80 chances to prove a case, and that the judge would always, well, they never could prove it. And I think that he saw me as somebody like him on that particular day.
I've talked with other people too, and for that matter, talked with the speaker, and it's interesting. I mean, his experience as a defense attorney and as trial attorney really does show through.
So I had an opportunity in the House to do a lot of work at a great committee, and I enjoyed it. And they saw me, the leadership saw me as somebody who was industrious, who was liberal in their view, but who had a fairly reasonable work process ethic. I wasn't a real pain in the rear. I mean, I was a little bit of a pain in the rear, but I was a little bit of a pain in the rear and pushing them substantively. I told Kathy Steinberg, and she agreed with me, that I pushed these guys substantively, and she pushed them personally more than I would. She really got in their face and said, "You're not doing right," and I would be a little bit more get in their face and say, "You're wrong because of these 18 reasons."
Now, how did you evolve that approach?
It's a pure lawyer kind of argument, purely willing to take them on in a substantive way, in a little bit of a parameter of decent behavior. In some committees down there, the Judiciary Committee was the one committee. I don't know if you ever sat through the House. I still believe the House Judiciary Committee is the most open, intellectual, substantive, and policy debate in any political setting I've ever seen. Those guys, and I was certainly with them every single day, will argue all afternoon on picayune and major things. They will just trot it out and fight on something every 10 minutes. And I think the quality of the debate in that room has always been extremely high. And in other committee rooms, if you raise any kind of substantive dialogue, people think it's really bad form. So,
did you and Kathy ever talk about, the different approaches, and how they might how they might have interact with each other and so forth?
I thought we were a very good team.
I remember that article a couple of years ago that said now that Kathy Steinberg is running for PSC, Mary Margaret Oliver will inherit the mantle of carrying on women's issues, but doesn't feel entirely comfortable in that role as being the one to hold the mantle. Do you remember that article?
No, but I think I've said this publicly a lot. I have affirmatively each session, and strategically chosen an area, an arena to work in that was not a traditional women's issue. And workers' comp was an area, but each year I pick out legislation affirmatively that's going to take me into a different arena.
So this year, Public Service
Commission. And Public Service Commission was a perfect arena. There's no substantive leadership in the Capitol. Everybody's scared of it. It's a lose-lose. It's not. I mean, it's good and bad. It's a lose-lose political dynamic. But it's a terribly complex and technically interesting and complicated arena. And I thought it was a really good arena for me. And I asked to be on Finance and Public Utilities. I asked Pierre for that. I told him that I was going to start wading into the public service arena.
You planned it just this last year, that this was the next.
And I'm happy with I'm sort of happy with how that worked out. I feel like my learning curve was really good. A lot of recognition and attention I didn't anticipate. From different arenas.
Right.
It was interesting. I enjoyed it.
Of course, one of your other major issues this time was a stalking bill. That, I mean, people have seen as a woman's issue. And that
That had
Is that, was that not, I mean, initially, was that one of the areas that you felt was as important as getting into as workers' comp? Or
Well,
did that evolve?
thinking about beginning my Senate arena, first of all, I had to win my election, so I wasn't doing an awful lot of thinking about how I'm going to place myself until after the election.
Right.
But in the summer of '92, I was invited to go have lunch at Natalie Dupree's home with a group of people who were forming themselves in the anti-stalking task force.
was her? I knew that she was involved, but what is her
Victim.
She was a victim.
All of these women in this anti-stalking task force were victims who had basically apolitical lives. They were not political. Nellie Dupree's never been in the Capitol for any reason. It was so funny that to see people at the table who recognized her and people who didn't. It was kind of interesting.
Right.
But
And it had been introduced the previous year, right?
Deborah Mills had taken a real interest in it. She was doing an excellent job of sort of leading the discussion. I went to this one lunch, told them I'd help them, told them I'd be interested, but that I was for office. I didn't know whether I was going to be there. Deborah was really working with them, and there was a woman at CDC by the name of Angie Hammock, Jim Hammock's daughter, who'd been a victim, who was chair of the task force, who did CDC public relations and had a political thing. And she really had some skills. She really understood that this is how you build a little bit of a political thing and how you deal with the media. And she and Deborah Mills, Angie Hammock and Deborah Mills did really good work throughout the fall. And I wasn't doing anything. I was running for office, you know. And then Deborah lost.
Right.
And Deborah and Eleanor Richardson asked me to introduce it. And I took their draft and introduced it, and wasn't anything I planned to, I planned to be involved, but I planned for it to come from the House and me not have to do a lot of work. What happened is that I ended up doing a lot of work on it and carrying major responsibility for it because they asked me to, because it was right for me to do, because I wanted to help them. The other thing that I really didn't plan for myself but was very happy to be a worker on was Pierre Howard's package.
Child safety.
Senate Bills 123. Child abuse package. He asked me to do that. Again, after the election, asked me to start sitting in on that, and it was only 10 days before the session or so as we were working on these drafts where he said, I'm going to want you to do it. You're going to introduce it first day.
I was wondering, it was described as Pierre's package.
I described it as Pierre's package everywhere I went.
Okay. But it's obviously an issue you'd been involved with for many years before.
I was a decent candidate. I was a realistic candidate to do that. Pierre and I practiced law together.
Right.
And Pierre and I have a very close political friendship and personal friendship, and used to have a close business friendship. So I was a good, opportunity for him, and I did a lot of work on it. I was working on it big time, and so those two big major projects, stalking and 1, 2, and 3, gave me a very high-profile women's issues. That was an important piece of my politics in '93. The other important piece of my politics in '93, which very much distinguishes my role in the House and the Senate. The first piece is sort of similar to my House role. The second piece was very different, and that's being chair of one of the most powerful committees in the Senate. There's no way you can compare the role I had in the House versus the role as a chair of the Judiciary Committee. I found that I did not have to spend any time, for practical purposes, going around asking people in one way or another permission to do X, Y, or Z in the Senate. I just did it because other people were, I was in a leadership position, and I learned throughout that there's nothing you can do to take you to any class to teach you how to do this, but I feel like my first session I learned a lot about using the power of the chair and using the leadership opportunity in a productive way. And that was sometimes still trying to be thoughtful and reflective about where did I use it well, where did I not use it well, where were the mistakes I made. What can I do to improve? This is number one goal every single day. What can I do to improve the quality of the debate, improve the quality of the product? And in a leadership role, because not everybody in the Senate has that goal, you've got to figure out how to generate that. So that was sort of my goal as a chair, and that was important. New role. The other important role in the Senate that was new to me, which I enjoyed very much, was appropriations. I was chair of the Education Subcommittee of Appropriations, K through 12, $3 billion of the $8.9 billion. That was a new role. Subcommittee chair, we had committees, we had good discussions, and during the last 5 days of the session, I sat in throughout the conference committee. I just kind of walked in. And I'm campaigning internally now for a bigger role in appropriations. So that was a new area, and I didn't do anything on the budget in the House. Nothing. That was important. I felt like I made some good progress on that, learning that. I made good progress in learning how to be a chair, good progress in appropriations. Education committee, I didn't make any progress. I don't feel like I did much there. And I think that was a weakness of my session. Pierre is having next week something he's asked me to help him with, and that's a conference on some educational things, and I'm hoping to do more. I'm vice chair of the Education Committee. David Scott, first year he's chair, and combination of his gun bill and his fleet finance bill, he wasn't spending as much time as he wanted to either. So
I can't recall very many major education bills coming up.
Well, in terms of the budget, though, do you feel that the education, that the appropriations procedure and so on is fairly well protected, the lottery money from?
Lottery money was in my subcommittee, and it's really interesting. One of the lottery categories is computer technology, innovative computer technology. That's where the soft area is. That's where the soft definition is. And I think you can make some fair arguments that this public television station is going to go on. You can make some fair statements that new generation school project. I mean, you can really start get into kind of creating an argument that the lottery money needs to go for this new computer technology program. There's no supplantation there. It's just how broadly do you define
Education.
computer technology innovative program?
Well, one of the people that writes for our Georgia legislature who is in education herself, teaches, and she's concerned that there are going to be ways in which money will end up for hardware, buildings, etc., and not.
That's the arena it's going to end up.
What?
That's the arena where there's opportunity. I know the Research Alliance people, which is a business economic development people, are going to be trying to be using lottery money for something on a computer. I think that the lottery money, that I want to use it smart, and I don't know that Research Alliance is not a smart use of that money. I don't know that going out tomorrow and buying a dish for every elementary school, does that sound like a stupid use of that money? There's no technology, there's no hardware, there's no infrastructure. So how are you going to create the infrastructure for that? I think there's a big startup, Gambles, and I want to spend some time this summer. It's one of my projects this summer to try to catch up on all that. The other area in the Senate that was new and fundamentally different, education appropriations was a substantive area where I had leadership responsibilities in both, very different from the House. But the other area that I felt new and different and important is helping Pierre. I want Pierre to be the next governor. I'm planning on Pierre being the next governor. My district was his district. I want to be better able to help manage the Senate flow. And with all the leadership losses, particularly Hal Dawkins and Wayne Garner since the session ended, I've been formulating my plans, formulating my thoughts on how to sort of get in and be more constructive from that. So my role in the Senate in general has been very different, for the most part, than my role in the House. And the work process of the Senate is not nearly as collaborative, even if I weren't in a good position. It's not nearly as collaborative or comprehensive or democratic as it is as the House. The House can always, because of numbers, this is purely related to numbers. The House can always generate from 180 people a good quality fight on something. There's just enough people there that you're going to have a mix of dialogues and talents and energies and diversities, and there's just a mix in the House that's going to stir up more debate. And in the Senate, with 56 people, there's simply not that kind of numbers that are going to generate quality, quantitative, substantive debate.
So you missed that?
I miss that a lot. What are the issues, if you watched it day to day, where did the Senate really have a decent debate in 1993?
The Senate played a role in the flag issue.
And we had I thought the most qualitative debate, the highest quality debate, was when I was definitely on the losing end, was victim impact statement.
I was going to ask about that. The issue about whether the victim would be hurt by the families brought in, that debate.
Whether the victim's family
Yeah.
has a right to testify to the jury in the death penalty sentencing stage of a death penalty case.
And whether that in fact would involve trying the victim.
Right. Right. Is it probative that the value of the person's life who's dead is worth more than the value of the person who you're about to try? Is that legally probative? So.
And your point on that was you were against the family coming in, right?
I think it's unconstitutional. I think that it is. I think it's really violative of the death penalty statute's not been changed in Georgia in 20 years, and you start changing this balance, going up to the United States Supreme Court again under a new Supreme Court justice will come in. Death penalty victim impact statements were decided in a 5-4 decision a couple of years ago. The Georgia Supreme Court, though, has not upheld them yet. It's just a mess. It's a mess, and I think it's bad policy. But I mean,
Also unconstitutional.
It's bad policy to change Georgia's death penalty statute and start that over again.
But then
There were only 6 people who voted with me. I mean, I was really disappointed in that. And there was no debate in the Senate on welfare reform. 0, zip. The way it was managed, 0, zip. PSC, we had a good debate for a couple of hours. It was only a partisan debate. It was 100% partisan. The debates in the Senate tend to be partisan debates. The debates in the House tend to be it's just free-flowing fight. And I miss that. I think that the Senate lacks a willingness to get in there and mix it up. And that's the numbers of people or something.
Is there some sense in which, like especially with the bills this session to do with crime, across the board, and the governor's provision bill, etc., a sense in which there's kind of like, there's a rhetoric of getting tough on crime, but in some respects not really wanting to deal with some of the hard issues, David Scott's bill for one?
Never wanted to deal with hard issues. And I've been trying to get, my post-session speech has been about guns. My post-session speech. And I'm lobbying Pierre to make it his post-session speech. And the short version of that is that policymakers have had a very increased understanding and awareness of violence in the home. But they rushed to vote for stalking, they rushed to vote for child abuse, they rushed to vote for battered women kind of things. For the first time, we didn't have any of these horrible debates, not one about I beat my children and helps them, I got beaten as a child, I'm a better person. Not one debate, children lie and manipulate and good men lie. Not one debate that women do this to get back at their boyfriends. None of that.
That's a real change.
Oh, tell me that's a real change. That's big time real change.
So you see this as a perhaps somewhat hopeful.
And all that progressive kind of enlightenment about violence in the home comes to a screeching halt when you start talking about guns in the home. Really throwing that out in my post-session speeches. When are we going to equate violence in the home with guns in the home? And there's backsliding on guns. It gets worse. It got worse in '93 than it was in '92.
Why do you suppose that is?
In '92, Ralph David Abernathy's bill on parental responsibility passed the Senate because Culver Kidd did it.
Right.
In 1993 session, Ralph David Abernathy had a bad session. He acted bad. This is something I let it out, but he acted bad. He didn't have Culver. Nobody felt like taking care of Ralph David. I got Ralph David's bill out of my committee. Had to vote to had to break the tie of the vote every time. But he did a bad job politically. And in the House, David Scott's bill passed the Senate with a not quite as good a margin. And the Speaker sent it to Public Safety instead of sending it to Judiciary. It passed out of Judiciary last year. I was on that committee and I worked on it, and close votes, but it went out. And Public Safety wouldn't even pass it out. So backsliding.
What was behind that one? Moving into Public Safety?
I don't know what the Speaker was doing. Bad act. He had a bad act. I don't know why he did it. Mad at David Scott, maybe, about fleet finance. I don't know. But it was bad.
So, what accounts for the change in attitude about domestic violence other than guns?
Read the newspaper every day. And in the stalking, it was fascinating to me the way legislators had been. First of all, the stalking people did a really good job of getting to legislators individually, victim to legislator. And
Right.
victims,
The testimony of the victims.
it was testimony of the victims. But legislators were willing to come down and say, I've been stalked, my daughter's been stalked, my employee's been stalked. They all had an experience, and they were all for the first time willing to talk about it. See, in a stalking instance, if you don't have, a lot of times you didn't have this sort of business about it was really a relationship problem, so you don't have to necessarily believe the woman. There was enough of these victims who said, I didn't know this guy, I met this guy in my life, and all of a sudden he's stalking.
Yeah, right.
So it was interesting. There was and all of these guys, Sonny Watson, a conservative, rural, who wants to have mandatory arrest on any domestic violence charge. It's controversial among women right now, that mandatory arrest. The women's groups are split on it. But Sonny wants to introduce it, wants to pass it because of some family dynamic where he's just convinced that the woman won't do enough to arrest him, and then I don't know whether there was a shooter, there was somebody who actually got killed. Finally, the criminal self-defense finally that happens. The woman who finally kills him.
Something.
So there's enough of those kind of.
But they draw the line at going beyond, well, that I mean, they won't do on guns in the home and certainly not guns in public because it's out of the domestic arena.
You know, the thing that was most upsetting to me yesterday about Marion Pope getting pulled over for DUI was him having that stupid gun in the car. I mean, I represent DUI people all the time, and I know Marion Pope, and, you know, that's just something that can happen to people, and it happened to him, and he screwed up, and, you know, there are people in your professional community that you know right now, that's a person likely to be picked up for DUI. You know that.
Sure.
And we know that in the political arena.
Sure.
And, but having that stupid gun in the car is what irritated me.
Back to the stalking legislation, I saw, you know, Skin Edge spoke about and brought the anti-abortion protesters into it, and I guess Pam Gleaton as well from Riverdale. How was that won so that what was in the final bill was a broad constitutional?
That's a national agenda item. That's out of the national right wing. That stalking is dealing with Project Rescue.
Operation Rescue, yeah.
So that's part. The right wing has one agenda nationally, sex ed. It's all just so predictable, and so that's something they pick out of a national agenda. It had no relationship to the real dynamic of what we were talking about.
But how did you stop the, you know, itemization?
The itemization started out only in the business arena, but the House Judiciary Committee, again a qualitative body, decided to take that out. And they had a very good suggestion. Just said no legitimate business purpose, and that protects all legitimate businesses that are out there. It's legal to surveil you if you're an insurance defense firm.
Right.
So all that got resolved that way. The constitutional thing, I never let a laundry list start. And Pam Blanton's, you know, even, she got, what'd she get, 5 votes? 7 votes. Classic right-wing ideologues.
Right. Anti-abortionists. So that really, you didn't feel that ever really was a...
It was irritating. He was never, she was not good at making a substantive constitutional argument on the floor of the Senate. And I think people saw it as just one of the checklist of...
And wasn't the House bill, stalking bill, different in a number of regards from the Senate one at the outset?
There was a couple of 2 or 3 stalking bills introduced in the House, and good provisions, I think good provisions of those bills were included in Senate Bill 13 when they came over. The House Judiciary Committee had 4 or 5 hearings. Kathy Cox really did a good job. John Simpson, Tom Cawthorn. We had a continual dialogue going on with law enforcement about notification of victims. When I started out this project, and I put notification of victims mandated by the sheriffs upon release of bond, and I knew the sheriffs were going to oppose it. If you had asked me in the beginning whether we would win that against the sheriffs, I would have said no. But I put it in there and said, well, let's just see. The sheriffs never won it one day. And I thought that was educational to me. The sheriffs weren't going to win that. Now, we did end up giving them immunity, which I didn't care about because you can't sue them for that stuff anyway, in my opinion, really, practically speaking. I thought that was real interesting. The sheriffs never won that. And they finally just got embarrassed asking for it every time.
Well, why do you think that was?
Victims.
The power of the victims.
Well, the power of the victims had made so many legislators want to vote for this thing.
Mm-hmm. That even the sheriffs.
And here you got to vote, you know, in the House, 172 to whatever it was. I mean, they just want to be out there saying the only legislator in 40 counties to vote against the stalking bill.
Right. I was moving to the child bills, 1, 2, 3. I was noticing that you questioned Dr. Greenwell and said, well, what has happened with the legislation that passed in '89, particularly the reporting of the counties and the computerized system that would link across county lines. And I remember at that time when that was passed and thinking, oh, this is a real breakthrough and so forth. And what's going to prevent 1, 2, 3 from having the same fate?
Part of my, the other part of my post-session speech, what I'm talking about, depending on what the group is, I'm frequently talking about 1, 2, and 3. I talk about my political maturing, that I'm 5.5 years into politics, that I'm halfway through my political career statistically. Statistically, people don't stay in politics 10 years. And that when I worked in that project in 1990, passed the bill, went back to my law office, and went back to work. Went to a couple of conferences, got a couple of awards. And that was it. And then that, post-1993, implementation. And I've been talking about that aggressively, and Pierre and I are going to do a little roadshow. We're scheduling some things. We're going to pick out, this is all in the talking stage right now, but it's good work that's being generated by Deborah Elovich in his office. I don't know if you know her. I talked to her this morning. We're going to pick out 4 judicial circuits, and we're going to personally go and talk about the implementation of those bills in those, and try to effectuate the implementation in at least 4 judicial circuits. Pierre and I are going to host a lunch here. We think DeKalb may be one of them. Host a lunch here in a couple of weeks and bring the usual suspects in. And
Speaking of usual suspects, I was wondering what prompted the letter that was in the paper. Just sort of an unusual thing for a public figure to write a letter of that sort. And
anyway, implementation is a big deal with 1, 2, and 3, and we talked about that throughout the session, and we're still talking about that. And Pierre went to the Metro Crime Commission yesterday morning, and so we're sort of got a little deal going about that. And we've certainly got Doug Greenwell his attention. The letter yesterday comes out of, in part, my personality to be a little bit challenging to the forces out there. Stylistically, I try to keep my working relationships within a fairly narrow pattern of professional courtesies, but I'm much more challenging. I can dish it out, and I feel like that's something I, in part, intend to do, and in part can't help myself. And I intended to do that. I'm up to here with whining, sniping people that don't work. And I'm particularly, Rick McDivitt and the Georgia Alliance for Children have been a drain of resources for 10 years. Do you know him?
know of him more than know him. And I was wondering whether that letter was somehow related to him.
It's related to him directly. He's never accomplished a single thing except shoot at somebody. Never comes to the Capitol. The paper, part of it is the paper. I talk to the paper all the time about, why do you quote this fool? And they say he's a good quote. So a little bit it was to the paper.
Okay.
And a lot of it was to him. And then a little of it was to Campaign for Prosperous Georgia.
Who criticized you over the PSC bill.
Right.
So tell me about that. I mean,
and other kind of groups that just are there. You know, the people in the halls change less frequently than the people in the seats. Do you know that?
I'm sure.
I mean, they're the same people. And what are they producing? Are they producing better government? I mean, the guy representing the podiatrist, or me representing the podiatrist, not producing better government. Are they producing health care reform? They're stopping health care. I mean, you know, what are they doing? And then you turn to the quote-unquote good government guys in the hall. What are they doing? They're just soaking up the atmosphere, too. They're just drinking the free Cokes. They're just having a good time. How many of the people in the hall are functionally unemployable?
So, you feel that CPG is in the same...
CPG, Deborah Shepherd just told me she basically didn't have time to work on my PSC bill, but she was against it.
Well, I saw they were quoted, I don't know if it was Deborah or somebody else who was quoted as saying, you know, the governor would be in the pocket of the utilities under
Right.
SB 250.
But she's not concerned the governor appoints the commissioners now. I mean, you know, when there's a vacancy. I mean, it was so intellectually dishonest. It was so weak, what they were saying. I said, where is the analysis? I don't have time to analyze it. I just know that if the utilities aren't against it, that means they want it. I mean, that's not good enough for me.
So you felt it was sort of knee-jerk.
It was knee-jerk, it was non-substantive, it was whiny, it was intellectually dishonest. What was interesting is, it was interesting to me, the bill got better at steps of the process. It got better despite a lack of willingness to kind of look at it, I think. And one of the things that happened to it that was a really good idea, and I wish like anything, I had thought of this myself. And I think it came from Tom Murphy himself. I haven't found anybody else who takes credit for it. But the present draft of 250 eliminates the governor totally, and the director of the utility finance section will be chosen the same way the state auditor is chosen, which is nominated by the House and confirmed by the Senate. I wish I had thought of that myself, because then I never would have had to deal with all this crap, because the governor didn't care. Zell said, Mary, let me make this perfectly clear, I've never talked to you about the PSC, and I don't want it. I mean, so...
Well, I mean, you said that you had worked in isolation on, you know, the authorship of this bill, so
Right.
that you could not be
Right.
tainted
That's right.
by any influence.
That's right. I still think that was the best process to do, even though campaign was coming to me for a month before. They were offended that I wouldn't bring them in, but I didn't do it with anybody. And
So they knew that this was in the works before.
they were directly complaining that I wouldn't give them my drafts. I said, I'm not giving my drafts to anybody. And then the day I introduced it, I personally went and handled it to everybody. But the point I'm making is that idea from the auditor, why didn't Campaign for Prosperous Georgia come up with that, instead of whining for 6 weeks about the governor's control? I thought that was a real good example of
Sort of a reactive rather than a proactive kind of stand.
I thought that was a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? You know, I was mad at myself.
The thought was that the governor was going to be in the pocket of the power of the utility companies. What's the prospect of that for next year?
It's going to pass. Well, my opinion.
Okay,
That's my opinion.
that's what we're asking.
Mac Barber, do you know him or ever talked to him?
Sure.
He's a lovely older man, and he's, I don't think he really serves the greater interest of Georgia by being chair of the PSC, but he's a lovely man and he's well liked. And he came and sat in the speaker's office every single day. And I think it'll pass. I think it's a partisan opposition. I think the Georgia Public, whatever it is, Foundation, the Tom Purdue people out on Tucker Road, those people are gearing up to make PSC their basis for reform, because that's their only statewide elected Republican.
Right.
So that's why the Republicans are against it.
Because it's the
Bobby Baker was going to be the reform agent for PSC.
Okay. Well, he was the one who was the most critical from the PSC, is that right?
Jordan was, really. But most of those guys, Bobby Baker came over and tried to hide in the back room and didn't want him to be recognized. Pafford refused to come over. Barber refused to come over.
And Rowan.
Rowan and Durden
approved
kind of. Rowan approved it. Durden was the oppositional opponent. Durden was the vocal opponent, and Rowan was the one for it. But I think it'll pass.
I was intrigued to see that Rowan openly supported the proposal. I was wondering if that was a function of his race against Kathy, where there was, this stuff about his relationship between the power companies.
Rowan is unbelievably ticked off and frustrated about the lack of any kind of real quality analysis over there. He's particularly mad at him because they won't go after the telephone people. You've got to get a majority vote to initiate an action over there, and he can't get anybody to vote with him to do anything. Period. And he said in public, I couldn't believe he said this in public at our hearings. He said that PSC members go over and get staff members and tell them to manufacture evidence that says X. And that was not the right system. I was kind of amazed that he said that in public, but that's true. I mean, I knew it to be true, but I thought that was a fairly brave thing for a PSC member to say.
Although,
Mac Barber sleeps in his office. He lives there.
I didn't know that.
He's a little bit addled right now. His wife died 2 or 3 years ago. He hangs out at the Emery Kroger. He's there a lot of nights. He used to meet me in my car and escort me into the car, pat the dog, escort me out. And now he's kind of a little embarrassed to see me. He doesn't know kind of what to say.
Right. So you think that there's at least a good test of the waters into the PSC? I mean, the bill didn't pass, but overall...
Passed the Senate overwhelmingly. Only Republicans voted against it except for Egan.
What change did the increased number of Republicans make, in your opinion, in this session?
It's not only the increased number, it's increased quality. I wasn't used to Republicans of real talent in the House, or energy or drive, but Skin Edge is a very talented, strategically smart, ambitious, and capable politician. And he's on a move. I mean, he's got some votes. He's got a good many votes. Percentage-wise, there are more Republican votes than in the Senate than there are in the House.
Yeah.
Senate's more partisan. And with aggressive talent now, Johnny and Skinner, Johnny's a very talented guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't have much help or support or the years I was over there in the House with him. But there's some talented Republicans in the Senate, and they're on the move. I know there are 2 Senate seats obviously open right now. Campaigns are aggressive. They're both donuts, Senate District, Garner and Dawkins.
Mm-hmm.
They're both donut areas. It's real key. Those are 2 such strong leaders in the Democrat column in the Senate. To lose both of them.
Yeah, I was sort of surprised about Garner going to pardons and paroles, and that, where does that leave him?
He leads him to have a job. Just one second.
We're talking about Wayne Garner.
I'm very, very fond of Wayne Garner. He votes wrong, but I'm an unbelievably talented guy. He had more talent to get up and give a speech. He's just so wonderful. It was funny during the victim impact thing, which I thought was really a pretty good debate, as debates go down there. Wayne was going around the floor to the Democrats. Steve Farrar told me this, and Wayne was saying to Steve, she's up there whining and crying those tears right now, and I'm going to go up there and I'm going to slam the door on her. That's around, lobbying around, and he went up there and gave the most, concluding, President Pro Tem gave the most gracious, complimentary to me. And I ended up getting 6 votes, he's just so talented guy. I really miss him.
We will wind wound up because but I want to talk, you were at least somehow involved in this so-called welfare reform, Senate Bill 26 and so forth. I was wondering if you could talk about that process.
Well, there was no process in the Senate. It was an excellent process in the House of real democracy. I mean, Georgiana Sinkfield is the hero, and she was supported by the leadership. She took a principled position. She was really strong, and I think she fairly got recognition that she deserved. And the 5-hour debate, 5 hours in the House, was both the best and the worst of quote-unquote policy discussions. And they held it a long, long time. And in the Senate, there was nothing. The Charles Walker's committee had, I don't know what kind of committee, I wasn't there. It was on one of the interim days. And then they snuck it out in a procedural move to put in an amendment to another bill where you couldn't vote on it separately. You could not vote on the amendment separately. You voted the bill up or down. And it was printed, this is just a vehicle to get it to the conference. Well, that was really poor. And there were 4 people who voted against that. 4. So, and I went to the well on that and said, this may be sometime we got a little debate here, a little quality analysis, and this is embarrassing just to rush this out this way.
That's right. You also quoted at one point saying you can't mandate mothers to go to work and also to leave their children neglected, or not to leave their children neglected.
I think caps on benefits is fundamentally poor policy. I also think the worst policy we did this year, which got no debate, was co-payments on Medicaid. We put $700,000 in the budget for outreach workers for TB, a preventable disease, and then we mandate co-payments for the mentally ill homeless guy under the bridge to go get his high blood pressure. But it's just stupid policy.
What's behind that?
No debate. And in past years, the House and the Senate leadership had stopped the governor. Governor had been wanting co-payments forever. Zell and Harris. And the Speaker and then Zell, now Peer, have been against it, and I don't know what happened. I mean, in the close budget thing, those days when I was in that room with 5 or 6 people, I said, what's going on here? What happened to this? And Wayne said, Mary, I agree with you, but we've lost it. When did we lose it?
So that's something to learn about the appropriations process.
I don't know what happened. I think co-payments must have happened before the session between the governor, the speaker, and Peer. But I don't know.
What about Wayne Garner's role in the flag issue and the Senate's part in that whole issue too?
I think that Wayne and Peer, really Peer, and Wayne and Pete, the 3 of them really worked conscientiously to pull together some discussion and some compromise, and I was in the middle of that. I thought the compromise was a fair-minded compromise, 2 flags over Georgia business. When the Republicans were going to put referendum on the ballot, on the floor, the Democratic strategy had to take over to manage the debate in a way the Democrats took the lead on the referendum debate, on the referendum vote. And the issue became not whether to have a referendum, because you couldn't vote against a referendum. The issue became when to have the referendum. And
because the Republicans had sort of forced the idea of a referendum.
They were going to have an amendment on the floor of the Senate. Whatever came to the floor, they were going to amend, we want a referendum in November.
Right.
And it was politically impossible, in the view of most people, to tell people at home you voted against a referendum. So we moved the referendum vote, the first vote on the referendum, by a procedural thing, back to the primary. And then the Republicans didn't want it. They didn't want the conservative element of the Republican Party coming out in their primary.
Okay.
So they wanted the conservative element coming out in the general election.
out of the primary.
Out of the primary.
Okay, so they want him to be
When they wanted it.
Republicans who can win or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of that kind of fell apart. All that good work fell apart when the referendum took over the whole management of the issue.
And then it was bound to fail in the House.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess one other question about sort of the evolution of the women's caucus, such as it is. And
It's on the road. It's on the going. So
where
it's moving.
Where do you see that? And
It's not moving fast.
You say it's not moving?
Not moving fast. In part by design. Not moving fast. Realistically, Republican women have a tough internal Republican fight going on between what I very uncharitably refer to as the right-wing crazies and moderate Republicans. It's very hard to bring that fight to the Women's Caucus table. But I think even with that difficulty of the only biracial, the only urban-rural, the only bipartisan, we've done a lot. We've done a lot of good things, I think. And a little bit it got harder this year than easier because we lost all our leadership. Kathy, Mary Young Cumming, the nurse out here in DeKalb County, Rita, who was so good. That's a real loss, losing Rita. And getting a lot of very conservative Republican women in. Traded really those kind of people in for the. It's harder.
Quite different dynamics.
Harder.
Well, we're just at an hour. So let me close and thank you.
You're welcome.